very engaging, and we came up with some, I assume, great thoughts, or at least thoughts, uh, to help guide us on this path. But I imagine the other groups felt the same way. What we wanted to do was give transparency to the whole board, but also to the rest of the public on some of the themes and the types of things we were talking about in our breakout groups. And I believe Angelo and team have been busy synthesizing that at lunchtime. So thank you very much to all the moderators and the scribes and who've allowed this to happen. So Angelo, back to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Okay, so yes, very energized discussion, lots of insights that came out of these groups. For what I understand, all four groups had a really great discussion. Christy was my sidekick in Group A, and we had some really good discussion in that group. Okay, look, fundamentally, we've recorded those sessions such that we can transcribe and process them in great depth. So none of the insights that were raised are going to be lost. But for the purposes of a report back, I want to be realistic in terms of what we can accomplish here. Lots of thoughts across four groups. I'm going to bring up some things that were discussed for each of the questions, and also distill down what the question was asking for the purposes of our plenary listeners and participants that are dialed into the live stream, and then tell you a little bit about the discussion in each area. And then I encourage my fellow moderators and other colleagues to jump in and fill in some gaps where I've left some gaps. Okay. Question one was essentially about what challenges are you aware of that in applying ISQM1 and ISO 220 revised within the context of emerging technologies? And again, this is within the context of developing the technology, acquiring or licensing the technology, maintaining the technology, and ultimately using the technology in audit and assurance engagements. And I think the resounding kind of like main messaging that we got across the groups is that we have really good sound foundational principles in our standards. And there's nothing broken, and we can build on these standards. And so that was the resounding message that we heard across. We also heard, however, that some guidance might be useful to build on some of these in terms of how it relates to emerging tech. So lots of conversations about things around how do you understand that the tool is giving you what do you think it's giving you, that the outputs are useful. You know, different participants use different kind of like wording. So one practitioner member of the board said something around their firm has a fast lane, slow lane kind of dynamic in terms of the tools that they've got, meaning that they're stratifying the risks associated with what is the tool, how are we using it, how risky is it, and that way. There's I've heard from others that there's a closed system, open system dynamic that's going on that came out in another group. I believe it came out in Ado's group, where a closed system is something that the firm can manage. It's got a moat around it. It's airlocked so that they can control the confidentiality of the data that goes in and things like that, versus an open system where the firm would ask the practitioner to really pay attention to the outputs and how are you triangulating the usefulness of those outputs. There's a lot of that. Confidentiality, privacy, security was a big theme that came across all four groups. And particularly for the third-party tools is a big message that was coming across in a lot of the groups. Other groups were saying, you know, we point at 32F within your document. 32F is the quality management objective in ISQM1 that deals with technological resources. And I'll paraphrase what it says. It says, ensure that your quality objective is that you have the appropriate development, developing, maintaining, implementing, and using of the tool throughout your practice. So one group said, maybe it's broader than 32F. It's not just the one related to technological resources. It's also related to the governance aspects of ISQM1, the leadership aspects, the ethics part of ISQM1. So don't just focus in on 32F. Great idea, and we'll have a look at that as well. Let me just check out all of what we got here. Another big kind of like message that we heard across is these adaptive tools necessitate maybe a little bit of a different kind of view to how you're applying these principles. These tools are dynamic. They're adaptive. So within the context of that, you have to have a dynamic quality management system. A continuous monitoring function is one way that it was phrased. The other, and I think Josephine, I'm going to name drop you, and Josephine, please jump in if I paraphrase you incorrectly. Monitoring is already part of ISQM1. So this continuous monitoring is already an element of our standards. So maybe we can put some texture around that in any guidance that these adaptive tools would necessitate some continuous kind of like framework, life cycle management. Ethical considerations was a really, really big one. And particularly in relation to keeping humans in the loop. Because humans are in the loop, that obviously pulls in ethical considerations. How are humans behaving within the context of using these tools? So that was an important one that came up. And another one and Ado, I think you were stressing that this one is an important one that came out in your group, that there ultimately cannot be a lot of light between a tool that you develop versus one that you acquire. You can't penalize a firm that's developing a tool and say everybody that acquires a tool or licenses a tool gets a free pass in terms of quality management. Quality management principles apply regardless of how that tool comes into your practice. So you have to have a view to how do you manage the quality around that? And that might necessitate you engaging with the third party and so on and so forth. So that was a critical one. Okay. That's on question one. I'll pause here and see if anybody else has anything to add in terms of the moderators or my colleagues on the staff side that helped. Is there anything that we missed in terms of big themes? Christy points out, and she's right, scalability actually came out pretty prominently across. The idea here on the scalability is that not every tool is going to invoke a massive response. Depends on what you're using the tool for. And depends on how complex the tool is, and it depends on how complicated the tool is. So there's various factors at play here. So you don't run everything into the ground. It depends on what it is so there's a scalability aspect there. I'll pause here and see if there's any comments, Tom, on question one.
Any further comments on question one, Neil?
Straight caught, Tom, sorry. I got any further.
Nancy?
Yeah, so Angelo filed a good report. The one element I would add is that in our group, it came up fairly clearly that different jurisdictions are at different adoption rates. So there's a lot of places whereby adoption is not as advanced as we thought. So in other words, it's not rampant use of AI all across. So that came through loud and clear in our group.
Okay, thank you. Angela?
Okay, question two fundamentally dealt with, it was a question, let me just get to the question. The question is, are there any other frameworks out there that can inform the board's thinking? Certainly we heard from Riva this morning. She gave us a wonderful presentation in terms of how she's thinking about it and in turn how NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the US, has thought about AI governance and AI quality management. But there's other frameworks out there. And I listed some of them in your private supplement for the workshop. There's an OECD model and so on and so forth. I asked in the question, are there others that you think that we should be looking at? And, this is early on in the project, but here's some of the ones that came out. Look at ISO, great suggestion. Look at COBIT, COBIT. This one's been around for a while, but there's nuggets in there that could really inform our thinking. Look at COSO. COSO's developed an AI framework, definitely, and that's something that we've looked at, but let's look at the bottom line here, and this is the key message here. We're not the only industry that is looking inward to wondering how do we leverage these very, very powerful technologies. So there's lessons to be learned by looking at other frameworks. Now, that doesn't mean that we are going to adopt another framework, but we can certainly draw some lessons that could in turn inform some non-authoritative guidance. So that's the idea there. I'll pause here and see if there's any comments on that, Tom.
Any other thoughts? Okay, let's go to question 3.
And finally, question 3 was fundamentally about various stakeholders having different ideas, different expectations of what firms and practitioners should be doing, could be doing, etc. And the question ultimately was, does the IAASB have a role to play in terms of aligning these expectations, bringing consistency and clarity to the equation? What we heard in our group is a resounding yes. What we heard it from another group is that there was also a yes, but also a work with your other regulators, not that we're a regulator, but work with regulators and others, standard setters within your ecosystem, because this is an ecosystem-wide approach where they can be producing some guidance as well. But that was what came out in another group. But I think there was a resounding yes in terms of whether the IAASB has a role to play. Tom?
Any other thoughts here? Okay, back to you.
That was it, Tom.
Great, thank you. So we have a bit to work on going forward. This is really just the beginning of our information gathering journey. We'll be now focusing on engagement with stakeholders of all varieties. We got some comments about who that should be in the public session before we broke. So much appreciated. Before I close this session, Mark, any observations from the PIOB on our quality management discussions?
Nothing in particular, Tom, and sorry to have been late for this session. I for some reason thought it was past the hour rather than 20 minutes past, but I can see from the revised agenda that I missed that. But no, there were no specific thoughts from me, but throughout today I've witnessed a very sort of deep discussion of the issues, and it's been quite impressive.
Thank you. Okay, I appreciate all that. So we're gonna move to close the meeting. I think that's the last of our formal business on the agenda, unless anyone would like to raise anything before I bring this to close. One of the things we wanted to raise in public session too is that we've been thinking hard and long about how we strengthened our consultation process and improved our feedback loop. You know, one of the staff practices that we've been beginning is like, well, we meet with external groups to agree a summary of the key takeaways from that, and now start including that in our project papers and sharing it with the board so people could have transparency around that discussion and have regular feedback to the groups that we're meeting with. That's one big step forward. Secondly, in terms of considering FX, being much more explicit in our engagement and in our exposure periods about the impact in terms of implementation of standards and how that will work. Importantly, some of the other things that we're thinking about doing, and you know, we continue to hear how important it is to coordinate with IAASB. That has always been a priority, but we know we can continue to improve, getting earlier into the process. As you heard this week, the way we'll follow up our pie track 2. I know I'm not prepared to call it track 3 yet. Is that we will do things as jointly and maybe try to bring our cooperation and efforts with IAASB or as early in the process as possible, and consider where joint action is included, maybe including the strategy and work plan. So we have things to work out on that. But what we want to convey to the public and put on public record is our commitment to continuous improvement and to be responsive to stakeholders of all variety in this regard. So I don't know if anyone has any observations related to what I just said. But if you do, please feel free to raise your 10 card. Okay, I hope I captured sort of the general direction we were going. Nothing probably excites you more than reliving this meeting through the draft minutes. And those will be shared with you in due course, and then we'll post them for the September 2025 meeting. Just to note, if you hadn't figured this out yet, we will not use the held date of July 23rd for a board call. There's no need for that. So the next meeting will be September 15th to September 18th in New York, 4 days. The agenda is not finalized, but I guarantee you Billy's already thinking through the logistics of that agenda. It will occur here in New York. We're likely beginning posting of papers on August 25th, and everything should be up by August 29th. Now, the most important thing is that these were 3 days, but I don't know about you. It feels like 4 days to me. It's been a really action-packed and intense discussions, and really important topics on our agenda. I really want to thank, first of all, the team here at the IAASB for excellent work in getting the papers together. And I have to thank our partners in Australia and New Zealand for being active participants in this endeavor on 2410. Super job. The technical advisors, we couldn't live without you. You very much appreciated all your work and efforts. And of course, my fellow board members. So thank you for a great week. I also want to see, Mark, if you have any closing observation for the PIOB.
Yeah, I do. And to start with, I'd like to echo a lot of what you just said, Tom. I mean, it's been a very intense few days, and it certainly seems like longer than sort of just over 2.5 days. And I would like to say as well that I think the staff are to be congratulated on the quality and the timeliness as well of the papers, and the board for, frankly, the depth and the quality of the debate on the various topics. It's been pretty unrelenting. And also, Tom, if I may say so, to you for leading us all so effectively through the agenda. I think you certainly demonstrated, why the PIOB was so happy to sort of reappoint you as chair. I think on the specific topics, just a couple of observations, if I may. I think, everybody was pleased to finally reach a conclusion on Pi Track 2. And as I said earlier, the PIOB, we'll endeavour to consider the certification of that standard as soon as practically possible for us, and we've got some arrangements ongoing for that. We are mindful of stakeholder views regarding the way forward on Pi and IOSCOs in particular, as we discussed. Obviously, we'll leave you to deliberate on that. But I think, given the jurisdictional differences that affect IASB's definition of Pi, that are likely to remain for the foreseeable future, I personally think that you should perhaps consider using another term other than pi for a group of entities on which the ISAs require increased work effort. But obviously, I'll leave that for your deliberations. On the audit evidence, risk response, and ISRI 2410, I'd just say, reiterate what I said earlier in the meeting, and that is in your detailed drafting, please keep in mind, the PIF and the characteristics in particular of conciseness, clarity, and understandability. And not only for sort of users of financial statements, but also for the users of your standards. As I mentioned, those practitioners who maybe haven't got quite the technical resources that the major firms have. And I bear in mind those characteristics in designing your reporting as well. In other words, try to keep the length of the interim review report proportionate to an interim review as opposed to an annual audit. And as we discussed, there's probably a need for education efforts for users on the distinction between sort of reasonable and limited assurance. And finally, today, as I just said a few minutes ago, I was very impressed by the depth of thought in both the staff's work on quality management and technology, and also the debate that I saw around the table and in the breakout discussions. So all in all, I think you're to be congratulated on a very successful meeting, I wish you luck for your deliberations next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for the kind words. Any other items that people would like to raise before we close? Well, if that's the case, first of all, thank you for all the observers who are following us in the room and on YouTube this week, but also safe travels home to everyone. And I look forward to seeing many of you soon in person, probably. So thank you very much, and have a good, for the Northern Hemisphere, good summer. For the Southern Hemisphere, hopefully it's not so cold for you.